1. Yet again, my 19-year-old sister-in-law exceeded expectations and managed to insult me further. For context, my in-laws are out of town and asked my husband and I to help watch the house and pets. She still lives with them. We had the understanding I would cook the meals if she agreed to do the dishes because she hates cooking and only eats pre-packaged hash browns. My husband is at work all day and only gets home at night. Yesterday I woke up and got everything that needed to be done finished, i.e. take out the trash, clean the cat litter, empty the dishwasher, feed the pets, and do the laundry. Around 1 p.m., she woke up and came upstairs. While preparing for supper, I realized that we were out of spaghetti sauce, so I nicely asked her to go pick some up at the store, as I do not have a car and she does. Cue the whining of, "But can't you just use tomato soup?" No, I'm not making spaghetti with tomato soup. Then she cried about how she had just woken up, and how I haven't had my coffee yet. I said, "Okay, sit down, relax and have your coffee and cereal, then head to the store. You don't have to go right this minute." She tried to argue more, but I cut her off and said she didn't even have to cook it. I was making it. She finally went an hour later, and when she came back I asked her exact likes and dislikes, dietary restrictions for the spaghetti. She's vegetarian. I got to cooking and made her spaghetti separate so nothing would cross-contaminate, and she had no reason not to like it. She's had spaghetti before and liked it previously. After cooking and putting her and my husband's portions aside, I went back to my room to finish some work. Around midnight, I go back upstairs to greet my husband and help get supper ready for him, when I notice half the dishes are still in the sink and my sister-in-law is nowhere to be seen. I go to throw something out and see a pile of spaghetti in the trash. Her entire portion. I was livid. My husband came in and asked what was wrong, and when I pointed to the trash, he became angry as well. She does not pay for groceries, she didn't even cook it, yet she threw out perfectly good food instead of leaving it for someone else's leftovers. Based on the amount thrown out, I doubt she even had 1 or 2 bites. While I got my husband's supper, she came upstairs and made herself hash browns before scampering away. Cut to the next morning. My husband messaged her chores for the day. Clean up after the cat, get her laundry out of the dryer, and do the rest of the dishes before I started making supper tonight. She threw a hissy fit about it wasn't fair, his expectations of her, and ran off to her girlfriends for the day, leaving me to care for her cat and the mountain of dishes she left. I hate this girl now more than ever. I've never experienced someone so entitled they expect everything to be done for them without her lifting a finger. She's 19 and can't even do chores without throwing a tantrum. And the reason for half of the dishes still in the sink? Well, apparently the dishwater was full, and she couldn't possibly hand wash anything that's beneath her, so yeah, I want to go home. Edit for info, trigger warning, unalive. She gets away with a lot. When she was 16, she threatened to unalive herself to get a car. My mother-in-law has trauma of a sister unaliving, so ever since then she's been terrified of her doing it. She refuses to discipline her or get her to do anything. Examples being eating a proper meal, showering, basic hygiene, and getting a job. She will pick fights with the sibling. She has extreme political views. And if anyone disagrees with her, she will start shouting, until mother-in-law cuts in and tells the siblings to leave her alone. It's only been recently that my mother-in-law started getting stern with her. It's a slow process. Also, my husband already spoke to my father-in-law, and we won't be doing anything for her anymore. We would go home, but it's hours away, and I don't trust her to watch the pets. 2. This is the story of my entitled neighbor Bob. We live in an HOA. I know. Bob lives across the green space from us. Bob's entitlement was evident almost from the moment we moved in. About a month after we moved in, police, sheriff, and DEA came knocking at our door. Bob had called them and told them we had lawn bags full of cannabis in our garage. It's important to note here that I use medical cannabis. Bob runs the local Narcotics Anonymous group. Well, I gave the cops the grand tour of our home, and there was nothing here at all. They apologized for the intrusion and left. A week later, our landlord called, because Bob had called him, saying we had a grow-up going here. Our landlord knew he was lying because the landlord had just been here. Bob was trying to get us out of the neighborhood because he can't have that crap in his neighborhood. He gave up on that when my daughter and her husband purchased the property. Then he started with the constant complaints and demands. We weren't allowed to feed the squirrels because it made a mess. We couldn't plant clover because it might get in his yard. We had to mow more frequently because he mows twice a week. We only mowed once and it looked bad. The list goes on and on. He mows the green space between our houses every time he mows his lawn, killing all the wildflowers, and tells people they can't walk there because he mows it, so it's his. The worst of his entitled behavior started 2 years ago. He decided he was going to stop using his furnace and burn wood instead. Now I have lung cancer and my next-door neighbor has COPD, so this was really bad. In January 2022, we had a stagnant air warning, which means you can only use wood stoves or fireplaces, if that's your only source of heat. Bob didn't care, and the thick smoke from his wood stove blanketed the neighborhood. One morning I woke up unable to breathe. My daughter called for an ambulance. I stopped breathing and had to be intubated. I spent 6 days in a medically induced coma and another week in the hospital. My kids tried talking to him, I tried reasoning with him, but he didn't care. He said he was allowed to heat his house any way he saw fit. We called the county. They told him his wood stove was outdated and needed to be replaced. He said he would replace it, but 2 years on, it still has not happened. The final straw for me was when another neighbor and I had an argument. It was all of 2 minutes and resolved the next day. He came over screaming at me because he was not putting up with the crap in his neighborhood. Then he screamed at me that it was not fair that I got disability, cancer, and he had to work all day. A month later, he was suddenly in too much pain to work. He went on disability from his job, spending his time climbing on his roof, working on his motorcycles, mowing his yard every other day, and generally just enjoying not having to work. Someone he worked with turned him in for fraud, and we had investigators out here taking pictures of his activities around his house. I made sure to have a chat with them myself. 3. I was just reminiscing about the absurdity of this situation that happened almost 2 years ago, and I've decided it's too good not to share. I'll be honest, it involves a lot of legal stuff that I'm not sure I'm talking about 100% correctly, but I can assure you this story is true, as is the end result. This might be a long one, so buckle up. For context, my mom is a traveling healthcare worker, not a nurse, nor a doctor, just to clarify. And we're from the US. Usually, her contracts last from 8 weeks to 9 months, and she's worked all around the States. This results in an ungodly amount of airline miles that she likes to gift me so I can visit her whenever she's on contract. I get a nice vacation, she gets to see me, I get to see her. Win-win-win. 2 years ago, after I graduated and was living at my mom and her long-term boyfriend's house, in a COVID lockdown-induced depression and existential crisis, my mother scored her first overseas contract on a tropical island for 6 months, from June to the end of November. I had gotten a shitty job in my hometown to start saving for whatever my next step was. 3 months in, my mom realized the downside of being on a very small island where international travel to and fro was a pain in the butt. She was lonely. This prompted a very bashful phone call in which she asked me if I wanted to take a break from working and come stay with her for a while. I jumped at the opportunity and made arrangements to get my passport renewed and booked a ticket for me to stay with her for the last few months of her contract. All of this context comes to the main character, another US-based traveler, also not a nurse nor a doctor, who was my mother's co-worker, Mary. Mary, to put it bluntly, was racist as hell. and she was not enjoying getting paid to work on an island with crystal blue water on white sand beaches. Why? Because she failed to realize that she wouldn't be treating elite white resort goers. No. Turns out the people who tend to be treated at the local hospital were the native islanders. You know, the people of color. She was also a COVID denier, Trumper, and anti-vaxxer. Really, just a blast to talk to. She was so livid about having to go to a grocery shop surrounded by people of color, not what she called them. I'm sure you can guess. It started with N. It wasn't nipple. It didn't matter that she could go to the beach every day after work, and was lodged in a multi-million-dollar vacation home on one of the highest points of the island with a gorgeous view. Nah, she was too busy recoiling at the sight of melanin. So yeah, she hated being there and wanted nothing more than to leave. She latched on to my mother for company, and my mother reluctantly obliged her for a time due to aforementioned loneliness. The main conflict of this story comes when my mother's contract began to reach its end, while Mary still had a month to go. Mary fought tooth and nail to renegotiate an early end of her contract, but was denied, so what does she do? She just leaves. Like, packs all her stuff and departs to the US anyway. No biggie, right? She just doesn't get her remaining paychecks. Wrong. Here comes the beauty of contracts. See, the contract she agreed to comp her lodging on the condition she fulfill her employment duties. Since she very clearly had no intention to, the contract was therefore voided, and the compensation for her lodging was promptly retracted. She was now on the hook to pay back this country's health ministry for the several months of rent they had paid to house her in that gorgeous vacation home with a beautiful view. I'm not sure how much it would have been, but I'm guessing $1 million at the very least. Mary was now not only a crap employee in this country, but a literal fugitive. But she figured they could only arrest and charge her if she ever stepped foot back in their soil, so she wasn't concerned. She was mostly right, but that wasn't the only thing this country's government could do. They proceeded to ring up the good old US government, notify them of the charges, and let them take it from there. They couldn't have her extradited, but they could ask the US to flag her passport until she paid them or faced charges. So the US government said, "Sure, buddy, we'll do it." And they did. Mary can't leave the US anymore. She can't even go to Canada. She tried to join her friends on vacation in Mexico, but wouldn't be allowed to cross the border. So if you ever think you screwed up a job really badly, just remember that you at least aren't an actual international criminal who can no longer leave the country. I'm not sure why her racist butt even wanted to go to Mexico. I heard there are a lot of Mexican people there. 4. My wife has a friend, Beth, that is a single mom, but gets a lot of help from her parents. They often watch her kid, allowed them to move in rent-free when she was getting settled after relocating, things of that nature. She is pretty ungrateful about all the help she gets. I've heard her complaining about her parents over things like them asking her to get milk on her way home from work and having to take care of her mom while she was sick with COVID. She also expects her parents to watch her kid without giving any notice. Beth also has a really negative opinion about all men, stemming from her terrible choices in partners, and is antagonistic and vocal about it. She loves to pick fights with the dads in the friend group about how men don't contribute domestically, and they're all oppressive scum. The dads in the friend group are very involved with their children and are good domestic partners that put in their fair share. I am my daughter's primary caregiver, and do the vast majority of the domestic responsibilities around our home. My wife is the breadwinner. My wife is very happy with my parenting and our division of labor in our home. I also make sure my wife gets leisure time, free from our daughter whenever she wants it. This has done little to dissuade Beth from making disparaging comments. We all recently went to an event at a park. This event wasn't really my thing, but I went along to keep our daughter occupied. This way, my wife could relax and enjoy catching up with her friends. without having to chase around her high-energy preschooler. Beth commented that it's nice my wife has a babysitter, as if me spending time with my daughter is babysitting and not parenting. Beth and my wife had plans coming up to go to a crafting workshop. While discussing their plans for the day, Beth asked my wife if I'd babysit her kid, since I'd be staying home with my daughter. She did not offer to pay, so my wife shot her down. Beth said she probably has to cancel if I won't watch her kid. My wife said that's too bad, and she'll go alone. Beth has had several months to arrange childcare for their plans, but likely told her parents yesterday and found out they couldn't. Having enough money to hire a babysitter isn't the issue either. Beth is successful in her field and very comfortable financially. If she had ever offered to watch our daughter or wasn't completely toxic toward me because I have a penis, I'd have no problem helping her out. Her entitled attitude about me babysitting for free is what gets me the most. I'd never ask someone to babysit my kid without offering to pay. Before I go, I'd like to give a little more info to address some questions you might have. My wife is still friends with Beth because she is the most reliably there for her friend. Beth nearly always makes time and space for my wife when she's in need of someone outside of us. Additionally, they've been friends since they were children. Beth wasn't always this toxic, but has always been someone to stir the pot. Beth and I aren't friends. I very occasionally put up with her for my wife's sake. I ignore her and internally roll my eyes at her bombastic statements. I learned early on not to engage with her rhetoric. She is just trying to bait me into arguing with her. My wife does shut her down or corrects her when she's being toxic. My wife and I agree the misandrous comments won't fly around our daughter. I usually give Beth very little thought. I was just so stunned by the audacity of her entitlement that I had to share it. 5. I'm a 27-year-old male and used to work at a facility where I would cook, clean, and take care of the elderly. It was a retirement home situation and we had a lot of jobs. Handyman was not one of them. I was still relatively new to being a caregiver, so I was learning the ropes, and because of that, they had me working in the kitchen and helping take care of the residents when I could, so that I could get a handle on things and not be overwhelmed too quickly. We had a resident that didn't have any kids or anything like that, but he had these absolutely obnoxious friends that were sexist, racist, all that good stuff. Most of the time they didn't bother me because I made sure to keep myself in a place where they couldn't. Unfortunately, one day I slipped up. Our doorknob wasn't properly latching, which wasn't an issue, and I had already gone through the appropriate mediums to get it fixed. Let the owner know so that they can call the handyman, etc. Because I had other things to do that were actually my job. This lady comes up to me while I'm washing dishes after lunch, and I hear the standard, "Excuse me." I look up at her and try to be polite and ask her, "What can I help you with?" "Your front door isn't properly latching closed." "I'm aware. I've let the owner know, and he's getting someone sent down here as soon as he can." "Well, you're a man. Can't you do it?" Unfortunately, that's not in my job description. She then starts doing that thing where people clap to accentuate their words, a habit that pisses me off no end. "You need to go get a screwdriver to fix that door." As if I'm some sort of dog. I was an almost constantly annoyed 20-year-old at this point, and I hadn't had full control over my anger, or figured out how to deal with families and friends of residents that I didn't like. So I responded the only way I knew how. I clapped back at her with simply, "No." Unfortunately for her, I had been doing the dishes, and this ended up getting water down her front. Not a lot, just a little. It splashed me too, but at that point it didn't matter to me any. She ended up storming out and talking about how she was going to complain to the manager. The manager responded by banning her from entering the house from that point on. Nothing too big or major, just something I wanted to share. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Idiots in the Wild, episode 123. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please do poke the like button. Thank you kindly. Also, if you'd like to get the videos a little bit earlier, as in hot off the presses earlier, then please do support me on Patreon, which you can find linked in the description. You can support me for as little or as much as you like a month. And if that doesn't tickle your fancy, you can also buy Hellfreezer merch, also linked in the description. And you can support the videos on a one-time basis by clicking the little heart and making a one-time donation, and you can also do so through streams. None of this is required to enjoy the videos, but it is appreciated, and thank you. Alrighty, before we move on, let's see. When does this go out? Alright, no shoutouts until next week. And with that, let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is: name a task that you can easily do, but you make it feels more difficult to you than it actually is, so you put it off, and then it's done, and boom, you were like, okay, what was the fuss about? It's quick. I know it's quick. I should have done it sooner. To me, that's always something like, cutting the hedges and trimming the lawn. I'm not a garden person, although I do like having a house with a garden, if that makes sense. I just hate doing the work for it. Maybe one day I'll be rich enough to hire a garden, what do you call them, gardeners? Is that what they're called? That person that comes in and does all that work for you. Or is that stevedore? No, that was my friend named Steve. He used to sell doors. Anyway, that's mine. So please do let me know some of yours. Those tasks, they seem so arduous and impossible until you're doing them and you're like, oh yeah, right, this is actually quite easy. I was just being lazy. Please do let me know in a comment below. And with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.